What if you could ask me any question you wanted to ask? Well, this week I'm the guest of Mike Seminary's podcast. I think you'll probably get just about everything you might want to ask in this podcast. I hope you enjoy it. Let's join it now. How do I bring my faith to work? How do I tap into the power of God in my work-life call? Why am I going through this adversity? Is God mad at me? I'm Os Hillman, and I've been helping leaders like you answer these questions and more for over 30 years. That's what this podcast is all about. Let's learn and grow together. Welcome to TGIF, Today God is First. My parents were Christians, and they took us to church. And but it didn't. My life, once I became really committed to golf, I did pick up the game very quickly. I played in the U.S. Junior Amateur when I was 17. I had 3 hole-in-ones before I was 14 years old, and I broke the course record at my club of 66 before I was 14. So I was developing quite good, and then so when I went to school on a golf scholarship, University of South Carolina, and my whole life was bent on playing professional golf, and that literally was my God, if you will. A year out of college, I realized that I'm probably not. It was a major recession, 1974 and 5, and I was borderline in terms of attracting money to sponsor me, and so that became a real disappointment to me, such that it was a real crisis. But God used that to draw me to Himself through a pastor that I'd known growing up that now lived in North Myrtle Beach, where I live. And he developed a friendship with me again, and we just started talking. One thing led to the next that allowed me to make a decision for Christ in 1974, and my life has never been the same. I've never looked back since. I got out of golf for a while, got back in for a little while, even gave President Gerald Ford golf lessons in Vail, Colorado, and but eventually got out, and then went into business, started out in a sales job. And interesting that I was working at a club in North Carolina, and one of the business owners at that club gave me a chance in a sales position, and I would later lead him to Christ. And he's still a strong follower of Christ today. He's about my age, and so he's getting up there, but great memory. But anyway, I still love the game, still play, and still have a single-digit handicap, and it's a great game that as you get older and you can still play it.
It's interesting that you referenced that golf was your God. Because I'm going to use that, if you don't mind, to kind of weave into so many of the wonderful works that you make available to all of us. And that doesn't seem to be a shortage of things that so many of us would consider a God, whether it's our hobby, our golf, our work, whether it's sex or power or politics. The list goes on and on and on. And as I look at the back of your book, again, folks, this says TGIF for men. And yes, he's written a book for TGIF for women. I'm going to just list a few of the books you've authored that are great tools for everyone. The Upside of Adversity, From the Pit to Great. Who doesn't experience adversity nowadays? Change Agent. I really was drawn to this one. It also has its own website. Engaging Your Passion to Be One Who Makes a Difference, because that's Change Agent, CAMastermentor.com, by the way. We'll talk more about that. The Purposes of Money. Faith and work. Do they mix? Big discussion nowadays. Faith and work. Do they mix? TGIF for women. TGIF for men. Birdies, bogeys, and life lessons from the game of golf. How appropriate. We've already talked a little bit about golf. Proven strategies for business success. So, and I'm going to back up and thank you for penning all of those, Oz, you eventually got into the advertising marketing business and were very successful. The company was very formidable, very successful. How did your walk with your faith and being in the advertising business, what was your daily walk like as you were balancing challenges of everyday business and work and stresses and schedules and keeping balance by having this personal relationship with your Lord and Savior? How did you do that?
Well, I was a committed believer and I started my company and I wanted to really represent Christ in our business. The name of our company was the Aslan Group, named after Aslan the lion. In the Chronicles of Narnia, Jesus represented Aslan. So I wanted kind of a soft witness to my business, and so we were doing great for 12 years. We had clients like American Express, Steinway Pianos, Thomas Nelson Publishers, ADP Payroll Services, and a large carpet company. But in 1994, I tell people my year from hell came at my doorstep. And I don't know if it was from hell or heaven, but it was tough. And I would end up, my wife would walk in one day and say she wanted to separate. And it was a huge shock to me. I had an investment that became a Bernie Madoff type of scam, and I lost over $500,000, and I lost 80% of my business because one client who represented 80% of our business fired us and stuck us with a $140,000 bill. And then my vice president left and then took, ended up having my second largest account. So life went from one place to a whole nother place, all within 3 months. And it was a devastating time. And that period, that adversity would last 7 years to the month. 7 years to the month, I would get a windfall of money from one piece of property I was able to hold on to that I was able to sell for 6.5 times what I paid for it and pay all my debts and pay debt free, paid for my home debt free. And in the midst of that 7 year adversity, God birthed what I'm doing today. Around 1998, I started writing a devotional primarily for myself. I was trying to make sense of my adversity, and I started sending it to friends. And if I missed a day or two, they'd say, "Hey, where's my devotion?" I'd say, "What do you mean, where's your devotion? You're not paying for that." And they said, well, "This is really good." And then a guy that owned an internet site that later became crosswalk.com said, "These are really good. I think we need to send it out. Instead of you just send it out to your distribution list, let me put it on our website and send it out that way." And so he did, and I started getting emails from people all over the world saying, "You read my mail today. You spoke right into my situation." Every person said the same thing. And so that became todaygodisfirst.com, and it's now read in 105 countries daily. We send out over 3 million messages a month. But the real turning point was 2 years into my verse in 1996. Someone sent an audio tape to me by J. Gunnar Olsen, who's the founder of the International Christian Chamber of Commerce in Sweden. They were in about 75 countries at the time. I didn't know anything about them. But on the tape, it said God was raising up Josephs all over the world today, and they're often signified by extraordinary adversity in their business and personal life. And I said, "Oh my gosh, this man knows what I'm going through. I need to be able to talk to this man." He found out he's going to be in Washington, D.C. in 2 months at their international conference, and I flew there hoping to get to meet him, and he was so very gracious to meet me the very night of his conference in his boardroom. And he listened to my story, and he said, "Oh, you have a Joseph calling. It's a calling that is earmarked by adversity. It's a marketplace call. And so he pulled out a napkin and says, here's where you are now. Here's the next phase of that. And then here's the next phase. And it's all dependent on if you press into the Lord with all your heart. And that day, Gunnar became my spiritual father in the marketplace. Still is today. He's 87 years old. I talked to him last week. Lives in Sweden. And so little would I realize that God would turn my valley of Achor, which means trouble, in Hosea 2:15, into a door of hope for not only for me but others. And he would end up taking me to 26 countries and training leaders there. And I just finished my 26th book. And for a guy that barely got out of English class, you got to believe God has a sense of humor. So that's kind of how we got here. And then I ended up writing a book called The Joseph Calling that I felt like God gave me a lot of insight for people who are going through adversity. And so that book came out a few years ago.
I want to go back a little bit to you just casually kind of brushed it aside. Your Job moment, where life was pretty good, and in a very short period of time, your wife asked for a separation. Your business went south in a heartbeat, and you had 7 years of struggle. And that's pretty biblical, 7 years of struggle. During that time, where exactly was your faith walk? I mean, because you were on a roll. Everything was going really, you thought anyway, was going really well. And all of a sudden it wasn't. What was your faith walk like during that period of time?
Well, the first year I was really angry with God. I was thinking, Lord, I've been giving money to Christian causes. I've been serving you. I've been working at my marriage. We've been in counseling, da da da. Had all these justifications for why I shouldn't have to go through that. And he didn't listen to any of it. And but I realized that I had some, my mentor Gunnar Olson said to me one day, he says, Os, you remind me a little bit of Jacob. Jacob, there were some things that were some character things that Jacob needed to work out, God needed to work out. But he did so because he saw something in Jacob he could really use. And he had a patriarchal call on his life. He says, I see that in you, and that God is working out these. And God brought a couple of people into my life during that 7 years that were real bulldogs spiritually. And they came up alongside of me and they spoke into my life and said, there's nothing wrong with you. You just got a stronghold of insecurity and fear that makes you control people and circumstances. I said, really? And he even proved it to me. And this guy was a tough guy. He was in the military and went to Vietnam as a helicopter pilot. We ran a Christian retreat center in New England. So he was a guy that most people said they couldn't stay around him more than 15 minutes. He was so intense. And I was with him every day. And God assigned him to me for a year to work out the stuff. And that was important to do. And, I discovered in studying the Joseph calling, I discovered that there were six stages most Josephs and most people, but specifically Josephs go through. And that is recruitment through a crisis. The Apostle Paul was struck blind. Peter had a fishing crisis. Most of the people that God used in a significant way were ushered into the front door of their larger calling through some type of crisis. Number two is they went through a season of character development, like Joseph. Joseph had 13 years of character development to prepare him for what God had for him. The third stage was isolation. I saw that all leaders have a period of isolation, and in that isolation period, that they often get downloads. They receive messages and become a messenger for God's purposes. The guy that wrote Pilgrim's Progress, he was 12 years in prison, and God gave him that book while he was in prison. The Apostle John on the island of Patmos wrote Revelation. He got a download from God. Isaiah, Jeremiah, you could see all of the prophets, they got downloads from God, and they were isolated. And then the next stage is the cross phase. Jesus allows us to go through the test of betrayal. And I noticed that almost every leader had some form of betrayal in their life. Jesus had betrayal. David had betrayal. You just look at all of them, they had some type of betrayal. And Jesus wants to find out if we're willing to wash the feet of Judas in our own life. And then the fifth stage is more the fruitful stage of the call, and that is problem solving. All God's leaders are problem solvers. David was a problem solver. Jesus was the ultimate problem solver. Every time he met someone, he solved the problem, whether it was a healing or provision or catching more fish, for Peter. But he solved the problem. And every time he solved the problem, his influence grew. And that's why by the time he entered Jerusalem on the donkey, thousands of people showed up because his reputation of a problem solver and miracle worker had preceded him. And I tell leaders, I say, if you really want to have influence in your city or community or your business, just be a problem solver. People don't care who solves the problem, they just want their problem solved. And that goes across the political spectrum. They just want their problem solved. You could argue maybe not in some of what we're seeing today, but generally speaking. And then the final stage is networks, that God works through networks. Father, Son, Holy Spirit, Jesus, and the 12. John 17, Jesus says, I pray that you would be one as me and my Father are one, that they might believe in me. I found that if you look at all the leaders, you'll see those 6 stages in all of them. Not necessarily in that exact order. Sometimes, something might show up before the other stage, but the stages are there. And I unpack that in more detail in the Joseph Calling book.
I'm thinking about what you just walked through and then your reference to the political barking of the day. Let me put it that way. And we already talked about all the gods that we have put in front of us. And I keep looking at your marketplaceleaders.com site. But by the way, of all your websites, I'm going to list them all on mikeseminary.com and ways for people to reach out to you. But what's the preferred website that you would want people to go to where they have access to all of your work, all of your material?
Well, I would go to todaygodisfirst.com where
Okay.
they can access the devotional, and then there's links to other things there.
By the way, it also has a great app, TGIF. I want to focus in a little bit on changeagentmastermentor.com. And the reason I was drawn to that, and you've already mentioned two mentors you've had in your life. I have a handful of them. Mentors are critically important. And my personal belief is mentors of faith should really be a priority for everyone. What caused you to focus in on Change Agent, CAMastermentor.com? What prompted you to spend time and energy to have that particular focus? which I appreciate so much, by the way. And then how does it work for folks? What would you like them to do when they go to that website in terms of searching out, I want to be a change agent and a master mentor?
Yeah. So I started traveling a great deal in the after the year 2000, and God took me to 26 countries and so forth, but and hundreds of cities in the United States. And I would often get the question, "Do you have a mentoring program?" And I said, "Well, I really don't have a mentoring program just because I travel so much." But that prompted me to think about what could I do online that would be sort of a mentoring program. And so I came up with this Change Agent Master Mentor program where I created video PowerPoint teaching on various topics. And so we have over 40 courses and 140 classes on this online portal, and 50 video case studies and over 200 podcast interviews with people, and 2 live calls with me a month with the members. We have about 375 members right now in the program, and I decided to make it extremely affordable, and so it's only $19 a month, and they get about $700 worth of downloadable tools when they sign up, even if they were to cancel 2 weeks later. So it's a great resource. And so if you're a person that really wants to grow in the Lord and grow in your knowledge and understanding, and you're, in the scriptures, it's a great way to go because you can access it 24/7. You can access it with your phone like an app. And like if you're driving or, you know, wherever you are, you can access it.
So for $19 a month, that's depending on where you live, and I'll just, not that they need any free advertising, but I'll use Starbucks. You can go to Starbucks with 3 people and you don't have enough money if you have $19. So for $19, you have this treasure trove of information, personal calls with you, videos, podcasts, useful information for all of us that have an interest in being a master mentor and having a faith walk. You can't, $19 a month. Again, 3 people at Starbucks, that's not enough money. It's unbelievable. The mentors in your life, and I want to tie this back into master mentor. You mentioned you're a spiritual mentor, 87 years old. You just had a conversation with him. How often do you tap into your mentors, and how often do you recommend, not that there's a cookie cutter for everyone, but how often do you recommend that any of us should tap into our mentors for guidance and direction, and maybe even a beat down every once in a while, whatever it is that we need?
Well, I don't recommend it be overly structured. I remember years ago when I asked Gunnar specifically to mentor me, he says, "Oh, I'm not your mentor. I'm your friend, and we will be friends." And we have been friends, very close friends. In fact, in many ways, I think he considers me a son. And so what happened was he would speak into my life different times. I would travel to the country where he was speaking with the International Christian Chamber of Commerce, and usually we would take a few hours after everything's over and have lunch together. And it was during those times that he would say things and put things in my lap. He would often come up with some piece of nugget wisdom for me to think about, and or he'd say, "I want you to think about this, Os, and tell me what you think," which would force me to go in the scriptures and seek it out. And so it was very informal but formal, if you will. But he was always connected, and people in an organization were very shocked when they found out that Gunnar emailed me as often as he did, because he's extremely busy. But the Lord had spoken to him about me, and he just decided to sow into me, and it's been a real blessing for me. So I think the biggest thing is having a friendship with your mentor and just hanging out with them. And, I think that wisdom is often caught versus taught. It's better if you catch it rather than, because once you walk it out, once you live it, then it becomes part of you.
Honestly, the average person is going to spend at least a third of their working years. Let's just say that's 22 to 62. Let's just say that's 40. At least a third of that time in the workplace. Plenty of people more. They're not confined to an 8-hour day. They'll work a 9-hour day, a 10-hour day, 12. They'll work half a day, whatever the case might be. And there's a part of society that says you should never talk about your faith in the workplace. They also say you should never talk about politics in the work. But if we're spending at least a third of our time in the workplace, it's also a place where the devil could be at play. The devil could be at work. So how would you encourage us, those of us that are in the workplace, to share our faith without being disruptive? Because nowadays with HR policies, that could be perceived as something that is offensive. What are some of your suggestions for how we can gently and properly do that?
Well, I think it was St. Francis of Assisi that may have said, preach the gospel always, and when necessary, use words. We are the ministry, we are the witness, whether we say words or not. We are being seen, we're being watched, we're being observed. I'll never forget when I had to take a consulting job after my ad agency was no longer functioning and bringing the income I needed, and I had to pay the bills, and I did that by taking on a role of marketing director for a sports company run by a Jewish man. He knew my ad background and so forth. I didn't know that he knew that much about my Christian background until one day we were in a boardroom meeting with the staff, and I'm new, and this is like my first meeting, and he says, gentlemen, I'd like y'all to meet Os Hillman. He's going to be our interim marketing director for the next few months, and he has a rather unique way of doing business. He does it from a Christian biblical perspective. Os, would you like to share what that means? Talk about being put on the spot. And I kind of stumbled through it and explained it, and so forth. And so over the next few months, I wasn't proselytizing, or I wasn't sharing my faith with people while I worked, but they knew where I stood, and they could see I was different. And then one day, the sales manager comes into my office and says, "Can I speak to you?" I said, "Sure." And he comes in, and he starts telling me he's in a marriage crisis. And we start talking about that. And well, I ended up leading that man to the Lord. And I never had spoken to him about my faith up to that point. I think we get hung up on to-dos when it comes to whether we share our faith. When we abide in Christ, he'll bring opportunities to us. And if there's a time where you really need to speak to somebody, I suggest do it on company hours, because you're stealing from your employer if you do that. So make a time for a coffee break or lunch or someplace off site. Then you'll never be accused of any wrongdoing, no matter how woke the company is. The other thing that years ago, 2000, I believe it was 4, the New York Times interviewed me for a story they were going to do for an insert in their Sunday paper on faith in the workplace. Imagine that happening today. And they interviewed me 3 times, and the third time they came back and said, "Our editors are asking a question I don't know how to answer. Maybe you could tell us what you think." And they said, "What is the difference between a Christian in the workplace and a non-Christian?" And I said, "Well, that's a great question." And I said, "Well, I believe that a Christian should model 4 attributes. First is excellence. Daniel and his friends did their work 10 times better than anyone else. Integrity, Psalm 51, God says he desires truth in the inward parts. We're the same people behind closed doors as we are in public. Number 3 is servanthood. Jesus said, if you want to be great among them, you must be servant of all. And then 4th is miracles. Acts 5:12 says, the apostles did many miraculous signs in the public colonnade where the people could see them. And I said, now I grant you that even non-Christians can do 1, 2, and 3 pretty well. I've seen some non-Christians do it better than Christians. Non-Christians won't do number 4, miracles. And that's what really separates us from the pack. In fact, in this new season that I'm in, I had heart surgery in August, and I thought everything was over because I was feeling so bad leading up to that. But instead of retiring, I'm refiring, and I've been led to start a new website called the 512project.com, the 512project.com, and what that is displaying video stories of miracles in the marketplace, of the average person that's in the workplace, and they can verify a miracle that took place in their work environment. And so I've collected a number of those already. The website will actually go live this week. And so it's going to be designed, the purpose of it is to encourage believers to experience God in ways they've never experienced him, and to be inspired and to be activated. And, Gunnar Olson used to say to me, if he said it once, he said it 100 times to me. He said, Oz, how are you going to manifest God's life in that endeavor, that project? How are you going to see his power released through that activity? And it always challenged me to think through that lens, to see where God was in it.
The 512project.com. How can folks help you, Oz? How can people support your ministry, and what do you need from us?
Well, like any ministry, we depend on the support of our supporters and those that we're serving. Sending out 3 million emails a month is quite costly to do that. We've recently gone through a real challenge. Google and some of the email providers changed all of their rules about email. And so you have to jump through a bunch of hoops now to be approved as a sender. We had to stop sending any of our emails for a period of time to come in compliance, and then start back slowly putting, people are saying, where's my email? Where's my email? So it's not my fault, but here's the reason, when they write me. And so anyway, that's been a challenge to navigate those waters as we get up to speed with all of that. So monthly supporters are really helpful for us, and just being a part of the Change Agent Master Mentor is great for you and us. And so those would be 2 ways. Of course, prayer is always important.
And those two websites would be CA, as short for California, CA, but it's really change agent, camastermentor.com, and todaygodisfirst.com.
Yeah, there's a donate link on that page.
Okay. Are you traveling as much as you used to? I know you mentioned you had the heart hiccup, and I'm glad you're doing well, by the way. Are you?
You know, I have not been traveling much. I'm speaking for the first time publicly this coming weekend at the International Christian Chamber of Commerce USA conference, which I have not spoken at a conference probably since COVID. And then the following 2 weeks, I'll be in California for the Convene conference, which is an organization I'm on the board of. But other than that, it's been mostly online training.
And at your app, TGIF, virtually, if I've spent enough time in, I shouldn't have to ask you this, but out of respect, I will. Almost everything you make available, you can access through TGIF, because that's where I've watched your podcast, a number of videos. I mean, just about everything is on the app, correct?
It is. We have that app, and we're in the process of actually launching a brand new app uh, that can be accessed at commissioned.io, commissioned.io, and click on TGIF to become a part of our community. This is an app that is part of a worldwide community that have like accounts in this app. So you have the ability to access not only my resources, but many, many other resources as well on this one app.
Ross, thanks so much for taking time. I know it's not the darkest period of time since we've been on the planet. It sure seems like it. And maybe it seems like it because of technology. Technology is a blessing and a curse. And uh, it can be used for some really dark, dark experiences. And one of the best ways to deal with dark is light.
That's
And
right.
what you're doing is just you shine such a great light on life. You're a great mentor. Appreciate you so much. And in closing, Os, what else should we know about you, and what should we take away from our time today?
Well, I got married 7 years ago to Pamela, and Pamela is an amazing woman. She has her own prison ministry for 11 years, which came out of her own time of a dark place in her life that God turned into a door of hope for many others. She overcame a 30-year cocaine addiction and sexual abuse growing up. And because of the drugs, she ended up spending 18 months in prison. But as she says, it was a great blessing for her to go there to get away from the influences that were in her life. And she started that prison ministry inside the prison, and she has a 4-phase program. Her ministry is called lifechangerslegacy.org, lifechangerslegacy.org. And you know, the recidivism rate in the prison system in America is 68%. 68% of people who come out of prison will go back in prison within 3 years. Her recidivism rate is 2%.
Hmm.
Because once they go through her program, they are changed individuals. They don't want to go back to the old life. They don't. They're not the same people. And so she's been a blessing, and God's using her in great ways, and we're like two tracks, two nonprofits in the same household. She'd be a good interview for you.
I will ping her because
Let's face it, we all want to make a difference. We want to live for Christ. We want our work to have meaning deep down. We all want to live a larger story to make a difference in the world. But how do we do this? It doesn't just happen. We must invest in our spiritual and professional life that involves spiritual mentoring and training. But where do we go to get that kind of spiritual mentoring and professional training? Is it at church, a conference, a school? The Change Agent Master Mentor Program is the answer to that question, founded by Os Hillman. He is a pioneer in marketplace ministry and has had a 40-year advertising and business career, working with clients like American Express, Steinway Pianos, Thomas Nelson Publishers, and a host of other successful companies. He understands the challenge of living for Christ in a pressure-packed business environment. He created the Change Agent Master Mentor Program to help leaders. Os will help you realize your dream of being successful in your career and having an influence on your world. The Change Agent Master Mentor Program is designed for you to realize your larger story, to understand your purpose, to learn and apply your faith life to your work life from Os and other proven workspace leaders who are doing it. Our online course and group mentoring will help you become God's change agent, to be a cultural influencer and succeed in your work-life call, and grow in your relationship with God and with other members of the Change Agent Master Mentor Program. Come join us. Let's influence the world together. www.camastermentor.com